I'm Sarah Jensen, editor of OEM Off Highway, and welcome to Design and Engineering Insights. Today, I'll be speaking with Rob Fowler, CEO of Volta Trucks, about the cab design of this new electric truck. Thank you, Rob, for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
So could you start by talking about how you guys maybe designed the operator cab for the new Volta Zero electric truck, and if there were any specific industry challenges you guys were trying to provide a solution for, or things you were looking to change and update with the cab compared to traditional truck cabs?
Yeah, I think the really interesting bit for me was that because we weren't starting with a legacy supply chain, or because we weren't taking an existing diesel product and trying to make it into an electric product, it gave us the freedom to redesign the product completely from scratch. So we didn't have those sort of existing supply chain challenges that meant that we had to build our vehicle in a certain way. So it gave us a really good head start. But I think the business kind of recognized a couple of key bits that are affecting the industry as we see it in Europe. I think the first is we're building an urban distribution vehicle where safety is most critical. So, for example, in London, the Mayor's transport strategy has an objective to reduce the number of deaths and serious injuries on the roads, which I think everybody collectively can agree is a good thing. But I think what we're seeing in the data is that there's far too many accidents and fatalities involving heavy goods vehicles. In fact, it's disproportionately high. So they drive a relatively low percentage of miles inside London, but actually then have a very high percentage number of fatalities involve heavy goods vehicles and cyclists or pedestrians. So the first thing for us was actually, well, how do we design a cab that eliminates blind spots, that makes a vehicle safer, that incorporates hardware and software, that kind of ultimately tries to build the safest commercial vehicle that we possibly can do. And I think what's really interesting is if you look at the way that diesel trucks are constructed, they haven't really changed since trucks were first created. You put the diesel engine at the front, you put the driver up high, you get blind spots around the vehicle. And by putting the driver in the center at a much lower eye level, so the driver's eye level is about 1.8 meters, you get much better visibility and reduce blind spots all the way around the vehicle. So I think that was the first piece for us. I think the second piece is that we're seeing a significant shortage in Europe of HGV drivers and people leaving the industry. And we started to think about, well, how do we change that experience for them inside the vehicle? So even just doing multi-drop delivery, climbing up and down those steps 30 to 40 times a day, you're seeing lots of ankles and knees and hip type injuries. So we thought very much about the whole driver experience. We wanted to make it like driving a sort of high-end premium car where people could just step into it a little bit like a bus. It's very ergonomically designed. It's got a very good quality of finish internally. And really design a truck with more the driver in mind, really, which I think we've managed to achieve. And what's been really interesting is that reaction from people who have driven our vehicle and reaction from people who have seen our vehicle has all been really positive.
So what are maybe some of the different or unique features of the cab design compared to other vehicles?
We've dropped the driver's eye height down, and at 1.8 meters, being at the same height as a pedestrian or a cyclist, you form a very positive relationship. So there's a lot of accidents where vehicles are turning and then near side closest to the curb, whichever way they're going, actually ends up coming into contact with people. So we've managed to change that so you get a very positive relationship between the driver and the cyclist or the pedestrian who can actually look at each other and acknowledge each other's presence. So I think that's the first really interesting piece. We put the driver in the center so that we've stopped the driver from having to climb into incoming rows of traffic, so the driver can get out both sides of the vehicles. The doors are now sliding doors rather than doors that open outwards, so you don't hit pedestrians or motorcyclists or cyclists coming along. But I think the kind of 220-degree field of vision, the sort of much lower seating height, the extra visibility around the front and the side, and actually just back of the driver's shoulders, all contributes to a very, very different in-cab experience for the driver.
And are there any changes or new types of like operator interface components that are in there compared to a traditional truck, or is it pretty similar?
No, so we've gone away completely from the old days of getting in and finding 50 buttons, but only 22 of them do something. We've digitized the whole cab environment and structure. I would think that talks to a newer generation of drivers who are more tech friendly, more tech enabled. So we've got kind of options around routing and mapping solutions, as well as the more traditional controls and the traditional speed and sort of not rev count, but the old traditional more dial structure. So we haven't got any dials at all. It's all tablet based. The cameras are tablet based as well, or camera based. So we've tried to create a very very different experience. And I think what's been interesting is that a lot of people are commenting around how actually they find it good that we're looking after their employees differently, right? So we're trying to treat their employees differently. And I think what I would see in industry is that, generally speaking, if the drivers feel like they're driving a better quality or a newer vehicle or a nicer vehicle, they tend to look after them better as well, rather than getting into something which is a bit old and dirty. So we've had a really good reaction from a lot of customers around how that driver experience changes. And what we know is that when you go out to test these vehicles, it's the driver feedback which is being handed back to the fleet buyers as well. It's the driver who's saying, I either like it or I don't like it. So it's really important that we get that experience right for them.
So are there any other maybe new technologies such as safety systems or anything that were also included in this? Because I know you mentioned before safety is a big factor.
What we've tried to do is to take as many ADAS systems that you would normally associate with your car, right? And there's been a bit of a catch-up problem, I think, happening in the heavy goods vehicle industry in general, where the safety technology hasn't progressed at the rate of the passenger car has. So for us, it's been a great exercise in looking at the ADAS systems available in the marketplace, what we can bring together. And really, we fitted out a whole range of systems within that vehicle. But ultimately, it's not just about that safety piece. It's about trying to improve the kind of drivers, support the drivers. You know, for anyone who's driven a truck through a busy city centre with lots of cyclists and pedestrians around, it's a very stressful environment, I think it's fair to say. So we tried to look at how we can use that technology to support the driver as well, to give them the feedback that they need to make sure they're aware of what's happening around them. So I wouldn't say there's one piece, but I think what we've done is collectively pulled together a number of systems to make that environment as safe as we possibly can do.
So what about the design of the electric truck made it possible to kind of redesign or reimagine the operator cab itself?
I think the key bit for me is, of course, what we're seeing from a lot of companies coming to market is what looks like a diesel truck. It just happens to be an electric truck, right? So we're not in the space at the moment where we're buying 50, 60,000 cabs a year or sort of 50, 60,000 parts for a cab a year. So we didn't have that kind of supply chain we had to break, in effect. We just started with a blank piece of paper. And then what we realized is that we could configure batteries in and around as we needed to, which was great. And we could just completely change that front end, because everything else gets taken and hidden within underneath the load space in the back of the vehicle. We can protect it with the chassis rails, and that reconfigures the front. So what is quite interesting that when we are seeing electric vehicles come forward in this kind of weight category from, I suppose, what you may call competitors of ours, it still looks and feels like a diesel truck. And it's been a great exercise for us in kind of just, well, thinking about how would you build a truck if you didn't have any constraints in the first place. We haven't got any constraints to start with. So we built, as we saw and as our designers and engineering team saw, the most efficient, safest, best way for a driver to drive that vehicle.
So how, if at all, does the design of this cab maybe fit in with any of the trends you guys are seeing regarding cab designs in general, or overall vehicle designs for electric trucks or traditional trucks?
I think it was quite interesting. We're starting to see some people kind of playing with the lower floor idea. I wouldn't say that it's got a massive traction from existing manufacturers at this point. It's relatively early stage in its thought processes. I think for us, though, it's also reflective of the way that particularly things like the e-commerce boom are going, where actually multi-drop is becoming more frequent. So profile of traffic is changing slightly. And actually, we're really kind of providing the drivers and the operators with that product, which is reflecting the way that the industry is going at this point, right? And I think we're very clear that we're building an urban distribution vehicle. And what we're not trying to do is to take like our vehicle is designed for people operating in city centres where legislation is coming forward that restricts access, where people are starting to change the way that they operate. We're not taking a truck which is designed for doing 600, 700 miles in one run and saying, now I want to put you into the urban environment. We're very prescriptive in our product class that says, we're going into city centres, we're going to build a truck for that purpose. It will tend to be multi-drop if it's a city centre. So climbing up and down 30 times a day isn't acceptable, even if you're going to business type locations. So it's been a great opportunity for us to just look at the way that the marketplace is going and look at our use case and not just try and fit a generic truck into the urban environment, but build something that fits into its surroundings. And our co-founder uses the sort of concept of working within a human-centric city. And it's kind of where we're going is we understand freight is a key component for cities. It's the lifeblood of cities. Everything you eat, everything you drink, everything you interact with tends to come on a freight vehicle, right? So freight will always be part of a city's life. But freight has to work alongside the residents and visitors and employees inside city centres and people who live and move around there. What you can't have is a situation where freight vehicles are being damaging to the people who live there. So we've tried to build that kind of human centricity into the vehicle that we're building.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today about the design of the cab for the Volta Zero and some of the trends you guys are seeing.
No problem. Thank you very much for having me.